Once upon a time, in a small town called Gloucester, there lived a couple named Fred and Rose West. They seemed like an ordinary pair, but behind closed doors, they were hiding something truly horrifying. In 1968, Rosemary, a young woman at the age of 15, crossed paths with Fred West, a man who was 27 years old. Despite the significant age gap, they chose to start a relationship together. However, Rosemary's parents were concerned about their daughter being involved with Fred, especially considering the unstable situation at home. As a child, Rosemary was repeatedly sexually abused by her own father, and then she began molesting her younger brothers. Rosemary's parents sent her to social services, but the department permitted Rosemary to maintain her relationship with Fred, allowing them to continue seeing each other. Over time, Fred and Rosemary made a discovery that they both had a dark and twisted fantasy connected to their sexual desires. They built a home where they raised their blended family, including Fred's 2 children from a previous marriage. A year later, when Rosemary was 16, she gave birth to their first child together. They decided to get married and were expecting their second child in 1972. It was during this time that they moved into their new residence at 25 Cromwell Street. Their home on Cromwell Street became a house of nightmares. In secret rooms and hidden corners, they carried out unspeakable acts of violence against young women. Some of these victims were even their own daughters. The couple's house became a chilling graveyard, hiding the truth from the outside world. The couple hosted parties. Over time, Rosemary gave birth to a total of 8 children. Out of these, 5 children were fathered by Fred, while the others were fathered by different men. These parties took a dark turn and led to a killing spree, where the couple would rape, torture, mutilate, and murder. Prior to meeting Rosemary, Fred committed his first murder. His victim was Anne McFall, a nanny who cared for Fred's children from his previous marriage. Shockingly, it was revealed that Anne was pregnant at the time of her murder, and some speculate that Fred may have been the father. Later on, Fred committed a horrifying act by strangling his first wife, Rena West, and killing her in August 1971. Rena's body was discovered in the same place where Anne McFall's remains had been found, dismembered and stored in plastic bags in a nearby field. In 1971, a tragic incident took place when Rosemary killed Charmaine West, who was Fred's stepdaughter from his previous marriage and only 8 years old. During that time, Fred was in prison for theft, and Charmaine was under the care of Rosemary. Rosemary wrote Fred in prison, "Darling, about Char, I think she likes to be handled rough. But darling, why do I have to be the one to do it?" Fred was happy by the act of Rosemary killing Charmaine. When Charmaine suddenly stopped attending school, teachers and friends grew concerned about her. Rosemary provided an explanation, claiming that the child had been taken by her mother, who Fred had killed, and the matter was left unquestioned at the time. The couple commenced their disturbing and perverse assaults on young women, engaging in terrifying acts as a team. Fred and Rose West targeted vulnerable individuals whom they believed they could easily control and manipulate. Their victims were often young girls and women who were in need of assistance, seeking employment, or facing difficult circumstances. They exploited their victims' vulnerabilities and used various methods to select them. Fred and Rose would offer their victims promises of employment, shelter, or support, presenting themselves as a helping hand in their time of need. They would use these false pretenses to gain the victim's trust and convince them to come to their home. The Wests specifically preyed on individuals who were running away from home or experiencing homelessness. These individuals were often desperate for a place to stay. Shockingly, some of the victims were their own family members, including stepdaughters and daughters. Fred constructed a secret room in the basement of their Cromwell Street home, which they used as a place for their disturbing activities. In this hidden space, the couple would entice victims and subject them to unimaginable acts of torture and extreme suffering. The first victim of the Wests was a young woman named Caroline Owens. She was subjected to a violent assault and rape, but fortunately, she managed to escape and report the incident to the police. Overwhelmed by fear and humiliation, Caroline declined to provide further evidence, resulting in the Wests being charged only with indecent assault rather than the full extent of their crimes. Unfortunately, the next victims of the couple were not fortunate enough to escape the horrors of their residence. Tragically, 10 more individuals fell victim to the evil couple and lost their lives in their house of torment. Fred and Rose West used various methods to kill their victims. Strangulation was a common method used by the Wests. They would ropes or cords to cut off the victim's air supply, causing death by asphyxiation. Some victims were subjected to severe beatings that resulted in fatal injuries. Fred and Rose West would physically assault their victims, inflicting brutal blows that led to their deaths. It is reported that the Wests also employed suffocation as a method of killing. The Wests would imprison their victims in the basement, subjecting them to days of torture before ultimately taking their lives. Fred and Rose West disposed of their victims' bodies in several locations, primarily in and around their home at 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester, England. The Wests buried several victims in shallow graves within the garden of their residence. The bodies were typically buried in areas that were not easily visible or accessible. Within their house, the Wests constructed hidden chambers and rooms specifically designed to hide their victims. Some victims' remains were found in these secret spaces. The Wests poured concrete over some of the buried bodies, preventing easy detection. Adding to the disturbing nature of their crimes, one of the victims was Heather West, the 16-year-old daughter of Rosemary and Fred. Shockingly, Heather and her siblings had endured consistent physical and sexual abuse from both of their parents throughout their upbringing. Tragically, this cycle of abuse led to Heather's untimely death at the hands of her own parents. The Wests buried their daughter Heather in their own garden. Shockingly, one of Heather's brothers unknowingly assisted in digging the grave, believing it was for a fish pond. To cover up their crime, the Wests fabricated stories, claiming that Heather had gone to Scotland to be with a female partner or had left to work at a summer camp. 5 years after they committing the murder of their own daughter, the Wests were finally apprehended for the heinous crime of raping a 14-year-old girl. During the investigation, the police discovered a disturbing collection of pornographic material consisting of 99 homemade videos hidden within their residence. The detective leading the case uncovered substantial evidence pointing to severe and unimaginable abuse. The Wests' inconsistent and contradictory accounts regarding their daughter Heather's whereabouts raised further suspicions, drawing increased attention from the authorities. During that time, one of the West children said a social worker, a disturbing family joke. The child disclosed that their father had murdered and buried their sister, Heather, and that if the other children misbehaved, they too would suffer the same fate beneath the ground. After nearly a year, the lead detective managed to obtain a search warrant, bringing an end to the Wests' sadistic reign of torture. In February 1994, the police arrived at the Cromwell Street home, armed with the search warrant. Rosemary, who was at home, promptly called Fred, who was at work. The investigators began digging up the garden, and tragically, Heather's body was the first one to be discovered. Soon after, the police unearthed the remains of 10 young women in the West's cellar and garden. These identified victims included Linda Gauff, Carol Ann Cooper, Lucy Partington, Reese Siegenthaler, Shirley Robinson, and Allison Chambers, all ranging in age from 15 to 21. It was widely suspected that the couple may have killed even more victims. Investigators discovered a maze of horror within the couple's home. Rooms designed to muffle screams, secret chambers to imprison their victims, and burial grounds concealed in the garden. The evidence mounted, painting a chilling picture of the West's reign of terror. Finally, the truth came crashing down on Fred and Rose. They were arrested on February 25, 1994, and faced trial for their heinous acts. Survivors bravely shared their stories, giving a voice to the victims who could no longer speak for themselves. Fred West was convicted of 12 murders. He couldn't face the consequences and took his own life in prison. In his suicide note, he included the folio suggestion for his tombstone epitaph, "In loving memory, Fred West, Rose West. Rest in peace where no shadow falls. In perfect peace he waits for Rose, his wife." Rose West was convicted of killing 10 people. She faced the full weight of her crimes. She was found guilty and sentenced to life behind bars, forever separated from society. If you like our content, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to press the bell icon.